preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I want to welcome you to the fourth and last part of our series of Critics' Choice. We've sort of ranged through lots of different decades, from 30s to 40s and 50s, and tonight's film takes us up right to the present. And we're very honored and pleased tonight to have Judith Crist, who selected the film that you'll see tonight, The Stuntman, for a number of reasons. It's a recent film that I dare say very, very few of you have seen, and I think you'll be able to see it tonight in a way that will both be enlightening and I think also a film that will be able to kind of become something you might tell your friends about, because it's a film that deserves to be seen a lot more than it has been seen. I want to introduce Judith Crist, she really doesn't, as proverbially say, needs no introduction. She's communicates her ideas on film in a number of different venues, both on television, Channel 9, through TV Guide, and through Saturday Review. And here she is with us tonight to talk about the film that she has selected in Critics' Choice, The Stuntman. Judith Crist.
Given my druthers, I wouldn't say a word. And in fact, I feel a little humble being here because I received a letter from a woman who expected to be here tonight. Is she here? Who has seen this movie 16 times. So she gave me both encouragement in my choice of the film and, as I say, a feeling of humility, and probably she should be up here instead of me talking about it. I did. Are we booming?
We're booming.
I did pick it as the top of my best list, the 10 best list that shackles critics annually. In 1980, when Ordinary People, The Great Santini, Coal Miner's Daughter, Breaker Morant, Kagamusha, Best Boy, Mon Oncle d'Amérique, Wise Blood, Just Tell Me What You Want, were around. And the reason I picked it as the top of the list was that it, to me, is one of the most adventurous and unlikely films to have been made in America. It's a risk-taking movie. I wrote about it. I'm going to quote you from my very favorite critic. I wrote about it in November of 1980, although the film had been made in 1978, but no major distributor wanted it. It was made by Richard Rush, who made a lot of motorcycle movies, who in the 60s. In the 70s, he made a movie called Getting Straight, which I hated. He made a movie called Freebie and the Bean, which I detested. But he made enough money. Freebie and the Bean was a very successful movie. He made enough money to start work on this film, and it enabled him to have cachet, as we all know, in making movies. You can make a movie only if you have made a movie that made money. And I thought this was a very risk-taking movie. It was finished and on a shelf in Hollywood, and people began talking about it. And a friend of mine in the film business had called me and said, "Would you like to look at a movie? I think you might think there's something in it." And word got around among various critics. And finally, Richard Rush came with the film and showed it to me and several other people. And we flipped. And because of our enthusiasm, the movie did get a distributor. Those of us who were writing for weeklies and monthlies reviewed it, and it went into distribution late in 1980. How many of you have seen it? Well, and the fact that you're here again, I think says something about the movie. 20th Century Fox finally did pick it up and distribute it. And he had adapted it with a screenplay by Lawrence Marcus from a Paul Brodeur novel that was published in 1970. But unlike, say, The Great Santini, why do I, as a critic, put it beyond and above The Great Santini? These comparisons are always odious anyway. One should never compare films that are so very different. It seemed to me that Rush had been remarkably adventurous in what he does with the film. As someone has said of it, it involves, it's an action movie, but it involves the crash of ideas instead of the crash of automobiles. It's an unexpected movie, and I'm not going to say anything more about it. I want you to share the pleasure of it with me. I think it's a movie that you give yourself to. In casting the film, he picked Peter O'Toole. He had never had anyone else in mind from the moment he conceived this movie. I think when you see the film, you'll understand exactly why. He cast Steve Railsback as the second hero, simply because Elia Kazan had said to him, you ought to use Steve Railsback. He's probably the finest young actor in America at the moment. He used actual settings, which you may or may not recognize, and above all, he used a creative interest and energy that is apparent from the very beginning of the film. I think where you will be caught is in that old metaphor bit. Somebody said, this is a movie with the courage of its own pretentiousness. Forget the metaphors. We're dealing with, essentially, what is real and what isn't. What you see may not be what it is. On what do you base your judgments, and on what do you base your actions? And from that point on, you will enter the world of the Stunt Man.
Very tidy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned earlier on in your comments about how difficult it was to make this film. Why do you think a film like this, it obviously has an incredible value in terms of production value, the people, the actors and all. A film like this, why it's so difficult to get a film like this made in this country? And shown and seen?
Well, you have a number of starting difficulties. If you want Peter O'Toole as your star, Peter O'Toole is not box office. Steve Railsback, nobody'd ever heard of. Barbara Hershey is not Goldie Hawn. That's the main difficulty in getting a film made. Rush had no difficulty getting it made. He had the next step difficulty, which is getting anybody to distribute it. There are any number of excellent films just sitting on shelves because no one wants particularly to show them. That is the plight of movies right now. It isn't so much the making of the movie, it's the showing and selling of it that is so very difficult these days.
And do you think, I mean, a film like this, it seems like it's about what it's trying to say and how it's saying it more than about the failure of box office actors. I mean, I think a film like this really challenges an audience, and a film like this really forces us to look at the world in a very different light. It doesn't lull us into some kind of cinematic sleep. Yeah.
Well, what I like about this movie is that it works on a totally surface level. You can take it for exactly what it is, and at the very top. It doesn't have to have any ideas except that it's telling you about a guy who is on the run and who stumbles into a movie-making project and by a happy coincidence is made use of by a director who's just killed his stuntman. We will never know if Bert is really dead or not. Whose stuntman has been killed, but who, and I hope you got this, and those first two reels were just awful. I mean, it was killing me because there were a lot of key lines that you were missing at the beginning. But he makes use of the fugitive by saying that he's the stuntman who came out of the car at the bottom of the river, and he needs 3 days more of shooting, and therefore he takes him in and teaches him to be a stuntman and so on. One of the lines that you missed, it was just as you decided to stop the film running, was of course one of the key lines. When he says to him, when they're going up in the hoist for the first time, and O'Toole says to him, "Don't be afraid. Just remember, King Kong the First was 3.5 feet tall, and he barely came up to Fay Wray's belly button." And several times later in the film, and in the final one, he keeps saying to him, "How tall was King Kong?" Which is, in effect, don't be afraid. There's nothing really to be afraid of. The King Kongs of this world are just this high. But you can go right through it and just see it as a view of movie making. If you want to an inside story, and of course then you can say, well, that's why that didn't make money. There have been very few movies about movie making that have been major box office successes. Even Sunset Boulevard was a very slow build of a movie. Initially, it was not one of the most popular movies ever made. And I think a latter-day one that is comparable is S.O.B. I think if you like this movie, you would like S.O.B., which not everybody likes, because it's a much tougher movie than this one. It doesn't give the audience an ultimate satisfaction.
Well, this movie, I think, always bears comparison to similar movies that have talked about the director as some kind of persona, whether it be Bergman as the director's magician or Fellini as kind of conjurer, and this one almost like the director as the devil, the director as this total manipulator of all images. I mean, it's kind of an interesting that we in this country make the director the devil, where in other countries the director takes a different role in terms of the relationship to the society as well as in the films.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw Fellini's Roma, and my favorite moment in it, do you remember that movie at all? It was a kind of travelogue of Rome, and he meets Anna Magnani. And the last shot you get of Magnani, in fact, it was done not too long before she died, but that's sort of irrelevant. He talks about her in the film, and you see her. And then she goes to the door, and he says, "Anna, will you come out with me?" And she just turns and looks at him over her shoulder and says, "Fellini, I don't trust you." It always left me with an image that I followed over in this, because the innocence of the people in perpetually trusting the director, and it takes a very sophisticated person to look the director in the eye, and a knowing one, and say, "I don't trust you." And that's another nice thing about this movie. Everybody is a fall guy over and over and over, when you want, literally and figuratively.
Get some questions from people who've seen it, and comments from the audience. Yes.
What was the director's idea, and what was his idea of the movie? I'm sure it was allegorical, and what was his conception of it? Or what do you think was it?
Yeah, I was talking with another critic recently about this movie, and we shared the pleasure of it. And I said, as I had told Dr. Samuels earlier, that I had thought of getting Richard Rush to come here. And this other critic said to me, "Listen, he'd have a heart attack. You know that. Because everybody is going to think that he had something very deep in mind. And he'll have to think up something very deep in mind to tell them." I think he basically, there were two things he wanted to do. He had long wanted, as most directors wanted, throughout the 70s, to make an anti-war film, to deal with Vietnam. And you could never get 3 cents to do anything serious about Vietnam. And when he found the Brodeur novel, from which this is a far step, he thought that he could use this as a metaphor. And again, I can just shoot myself for offering you this film with less than perfect equipment, because there are so many throwaways about the grunt, the young man who enlisted, which is an extremely interesting facet. And he wanted, through the World War I story, through the stunts, through the blood. Early on, one of the onlookers at the beach scene, which I think is terrific. The first time you see that, it just absolutely bowls you over. And watching the children who are watching all this killing, which is exactly one of the things that Rush wanted to say.
The 6 o'clock news.
Yeah, I mean, is the perfect enjoyment with which the kids are watching this. Then there is the aftermath as the smoke clears away, and of course people start reacting to that. But a young man says to the protagonist, the guy on the run, he turns to him and he says, "I don't know why they use so much blood. It spoils the realism." And that kind of thing is scattered throughout, so that I really think that he wanted to say a great deal about war indirectly, because you can't sell war. I mean, O'Toole makes remarks about it. The writer makes remarks about it. But he also wanted to get right down to the illusions that people have about war and what the realities are. The basic thing that he wanted as a movie maker to really deal with was, in a very existential form, reality, illusion, and what you think is real. And what this young man, who at one point says, well, coming out of Vietnam alive is a stunt. I can be a stunt man. And I basically think that Rush was not thinking in terms of metaphors. And I also think that he got caught up very much. That as it was working out, as he saw these wonderful cranes, the lifting and descending and picking up people, and constantly offering people rides in the helicopter and the going up, that he got, as he went, he suddenly began to see himself as director in that kind of role. And I think that Peter O'Toole's having made The Ruling Class, which was very, are you familiar with that film? Marvelous movie that O'Toole financed and made all for himself, that was a shocker because it's about a man who is under the, well, who I was going to say under the delusion, who is convinced that he is Christ. I think that O'Toole in that role, and his wanting O'Toole to play the director, again led to more metaphors and to, more imagery. Mm-hmm. There you are with a horse, one that's in a support. And then he just takes his chewing gum and sticks it on the horse's nose, and you know that it's not a real horse. It's, you could go on forever.
And so it just reminded me when Coppola was talking about Apocalypse Now, he talked about his statement about Vietnam is about how we brought illusion, that there's the illusion of the reality of the war. In this film, it sort of takes it the other way around. It talks about, his reality as illusion. This one is illusion as reality. I mean, almost the illusion itself becomes, when you get down to the end of it, you really you understand this person's fears, and he comes through the fears, and his confrontation with the director is similar to the confrontation with Kurtz and with Brando and in Apocalypse Now in terms of the fear.
It's very much, one of the things that occurred to me watching it for the umpth, not quite the umpteenth, but for the umpth time, was that you could think of it purely as the birth and life process of going through life and finally being cleansed in the ultimate confrontation with what you really think is your death, of a kind of cleansing. And boy, everything is, why am I so scared? Why am I running? It's survivable. Everything is breakaway. It doesn't, that you can get a very positive conclusion. And he grounds it again with this chucklehead, because the protagonist is not one of the great intellects of our time. Suddenly, gee, that stunt was worth $1,000. What do you mean only $650? You can't cheat me. You think I'm a dope. And going on as if absolutely nothing has happened.
The story really certainly does work on many different levels. But I think the cinematography contributes a whole lot to that. Could you comment some on the contribution of cinematography?
Oh, well, I just think it is brilliantly done. But even more than the cinematography, because I'd like to give an Oscar one day to an ugly movie. Every movie is just so beautifully photographed today. But I think the editing is so absolutely brilliant, which gives you, and my favorite one is that bawdy one, where the airplane goes smashing into a tree and then you find him. You really think, and I get fooled every time I watch it, you sort of think that he's just about to be killed, and you get him in final orgasm with the girl. And to me that is just such wonderful editing. The Marat Sad mad scene, the whole sequence of the major stunt and falling into the brothel, and only the second time do you realize that the stunt man, that the woman in the bed is a stunt man. made out, the one that clutches him and carries him out of there, actually rescuing him from some more debris. I think it's the editing of this film that is so remarkable, because when you don't have to stop to put another reel on the camera, it really goes along at breakneck speed. And I love it because even the scare climaxes, when the cops and the FBI are there to look at the rushes or the film from the accident, the pressure's kept up. O'Toole, I've got 2 minutes, gentlemen, and then I've got to go. The momentum of her parents, for example, and this to me is brilliant direction because it is purely visual, where you go to her parents' hands in their reaction to seeing their daughter naked in a nude scene. I think it's the directorial eye and the cutting of this picture that impresses me.
When you compare that what Spielberg's film that he did with that one that he had that Marvel, the Ferris wheel and all that, how the editing on that just doesn't work. It's a frenetic pace, but it's boring, and this it kind of involves even the beginning with the apple, that apple coming down and sort of follow that apple.
Yeah,
and the apple's the thing of
beginning,
director.
from the dog licking itself, and the tractor trailers and all of that. There are just little things. For example, when the girl is saying, "Come to my birthday party," and she is an actress, and she is doing it in Scarlett O'Hara terms and so on. And the pacing with which she says, "You get the Good Fellowship Award." She has an apple with one of those little cocktail umbrellas, that paper umbrella in it, and gives it to him, and then gets mad and throws it at him, and he takes a bite out of the apple and throws the apple away. It just goes click, click, click. I mean, it's just so fast, and you get her suddenly being hurt and piqued, and his getting his inner rage at it, and the throwing I just love it.
Yeah. The all-knowing, omnipotent being.
Yeah, I think I think the very primary metaphor that would come to my mind, and certainly it was in my review, was that O'Toole as God figure. What's interesting, and I think what may have slanted the comment, I don't know if you've ever seen the poster. It has one of the most fabulous posters that was ever made for a movie. This is a reduction of it. But there is the camera dolly, and O'Toole is on it, and he has horns and wings and a speared tail that comes out. I think of him as devilish.
But in the ruling class, too. The ruling class, the two parts to the film. In the first part is Jesus Christ, and the second part is really the devil. And so that it's God as devil too.
It was wonderful because that score, if you listen to it, is an action movie score. It is filled with all those little cliches that you see in Car Crash and Motorcycle and war adventure movies. And it's a kind of Saturday afternoon special score, and it just is so seductive, and it's interesting because I don't think you realize it until afterwards. My own theory is that if you ever hear a score during a movie, Now, if you've ever say, oh, gee, isn't that a great score during the movie, then the movie's dead. This one is so beautifully integrated. And I could do without it. It's used twice, the song. Mainly because, well, it's a small help from the filmmaker, just in case you're not getting it. Sort of thing, you know, what good are your dreams if there's no reality, and so on. I could have done without that, but I do feel, and I've felt it since the first time I saw the screening, that, okay, he gave me a little rib poke. And it's a help, but I just think the scoring itself is choice. Beautiful job.
How many times when you see a screening of a film before you feel prepared to write a review?
Oh, well, I just have a rule that sometimes I violate it by accident, or can't help myself. I see a movie only once because I am writing for my peers, for moviegoers like myself. If I were writing for Films in Review or Sight and Sound or the Cineasts Weekly, I would obviously go to see a movie several times and brood about it and superanalyze it and so on, but I consider myself a journalistic critic, and I am writing for people like myself who love movies, but it's not our entire life. We have families, we read newspapers, we like theater, we like dance, we're not blind or fixed on nothing but film. And therefore, I feel that most people are going to see a movie once, and that one should react to what you're going to see from the first viewing. Sometimes accidentally, time goes on, or in fact, what happened in the case of this film, Rush brought it in, showed it to me and some other critics. He brought his print into New York, and I loved it so, and I knew he was taking the print back the following Friday, and we would probably never see it again, as far as I could tell. And I wanted my husband and son to see it, and he was having another screening, and so the three of us went to see it about 2 days later. And then I wrote about it about a month later. But normally I see it only once.
The question I had, getting back to when I checked into getting the tickets for this, it was mentioning how, critically acclaimed movies that fail the box office. At the time, there was some talk about just the title alone of the movie helped to kill it in the box office. And I'm just wondering what you feel about it, even though it was so critically acclaimed, why, much like The Great Santini, it didn't go over the
Boy, if I could tell you that, I'd be getting the $27 million weekly. I think the things that worked against it were, as I say, the stars. It really, it didn't have anything much to offer on a marquee. And this indicates how, boy, critics don't accomplish very much. Because by the time, say, in a monthly, this movie came out, the picture was almost dead and gone. And it's too bad, but these movies do become cult movies. It has not been on television yet. Yeah, I mean on commercial, where the really big, it was not available to HBO. It was available too soon. Now the price would be tougher. But I just don't know. I mean, it's like The Great Santini, which was a wonderful movie. But it had Robert Duvall. Well, he's not Robert Redford. and ordinary people. You know, if Ordinary People had starred Robert Duvall, I think you would have gotten as fine and interesting a performance. But the movie would have gone blech, except for Mary Tyler Moore, who had a big, big, big following. But this is the very sad thing about it.
Well, we're very happy that you helped us resurrect it. I'm sorry about the projection problems, but we can transcend that. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you very much again, Judith.
I think that one of the interesting things about this movie is that you'll like it a lot better tomorrow.
Thanks again. I'm sorry about
How do you think that this group can continue without parallel organizational matrices? Do they have to really form their own? Is that the wrong way to go? Do they have the ability to form their own? I mean, you know how difficult it is to form a small magazine.
It can, although we have no organization. And one of the purposes of running Shema, the way I have run it over the years, is to prove that you can actually have something go on in the Jewish community which not only doesn't have an organization, except such as required by the New York State law of nonprofit educational corporations, which we minimally meet, which never has a convention, which has no resolutions, which doesn't even have an office. I mean, it is possible to do that. You do have to be crazy, but it is possible. So at least somebody's done it. Only 12 and a half years. We are just celebrating our female maturity. 12 years, 6 months and a day. And that's the state we have reached. But you see, that's why I would prefer to discuss theology. Theology doesn't know denominational labels. It knows positions, intellectual Jewish positions. And I would hope what the group would continue to do would be to infiltrate and continue the process which now makes these labels increasingly insignificant and unimportant, except insofar as you run across the problem of mass. In most chavurot, as the numbers of people rise from 20 couples to 35 couples, or somewhere there, you get involved in a problem of critical mass. And it's no longer the same. We no longer feel toward one another the way we used to feel toward one another in the good old days when we had started with a see? Now, how many 20, 25 couple groups will you need to reach out to any significant nucleus in American Jewry? The critical problem comes then how to, if I may say so, infiltrate and take over through ideology and example, and thereby transform the existing institutional structures.
There's a bad precedent for that. That is a failed precedent. You mentioned Mordecai Kaplan. He's over a century old. He lived to 120 and 6 weeks. I once asked my son, why the 6 weeks? He said, so it shouldn't be too subtle. Now, Mordecai Kaplan always had Mordecai Kaplan always had a notion of Reconstructionism as being a state of mind and not an institution. It ended up as an institution. There's now a Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and it is a would-be fourth denomination in Jewish life. Maybe the time comes when the horror of institutionalization becomes an irresistible temptation. I don't know. Now, there's another thing I want to report on this business about the small groups and so on. My daughter told me this. She, for a while, when she was still in Philadelphia, belonged to that chavurah that Art Green had started around the university there. When I was young, there used to be a song, "Wedding bells are breaking up that old gang of mine." And to summarize what Martha reported, it's the divorce courts are breaking up that old chavurah of mine. apparently there is a very substantial amount of, the malaise affecting all educated American society. And these advanced Jewish young people do not seem to respond to life's problems very significantly differently from advanced Episcopalian young people or Presbyterian young people, or nowadays even advanced Catholic young people.
That troubles you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure the observer and the moralist are very clearly distinguished here, because you don't like that, and you really wish that somehow there were a sense of idealism which would get them to overcome it, even somehow to be able to once again try to sanctify divorce in a Jewish way. You see, suppose we have to live with divorce. My grandfather was divorced. One doesn't have to come to America to be divorced. He divorced his wife, went to another country, Hungary, married another Jewish lady, thank God. And I am the result of that second marriage. Milton, why do you think you and I, have this relationship over the years? And there's a divorce in my deeply traditional Jewish background. Now, somehow, the Jewish community was at one time able to live with, and let me use a strong term, to sanctify divorce and the state of being divorced. One of our problems today is with not only divorce, but it is another secular act which destroys us Jewishly. To reintegrate this old Talmudic Jewish necessity, that's a high job. Now, I don't think any major Jewish institution is going to deal with that. But maybe some people who are living through this and facing this and suddenly have a sense of values which says, hey, we got a problem here, maybe they could come up with something.
Yes?
I'm concerned a little bit the emphasis on particularistic aspects of Jewish attitudes and a little less perhaps moral. I suspect this emphasis would be coming from Mr. Himmelfarb and the approach he represents, but Rabbi Gorlitz seems to be coming from you now. And I'm just wondering, I'd like both you gentlemen to address this question. Can we really just talk about how to be Jewish in a strictly internal sense when we live with all the clamorings and around us, the conflicts between minority groups that might really be our allies, when we live in a world where Uzi machine guns are sent from Israel to Somoza and arms deals and atomic deals are made in South Africa? Can any Jewish group, whether it be the new Jewish culture that you are advocating or some amorphous old-line Jewish religious approach as the Himmelfarb seems to be, can they ignore these things? Should they ignore them? And if not, how do you advocate dealing with these?
See,
Ensuring that Jews relate to the world as they always have and should.
well, but you see, the trouble was, as long as you said universalism, I didn't know what your political ideology was. If I now have to defend universalism as your particular political ideology, I'm going to be in all kinds of trouble. Because it sounds to me as if the only kind of universalism you know is a universalism which goes down a kind of left-wing line. Now, much of that, in fact, I personally approve of. But I'm very critical of that kind of thing today. I want to try to bring my Jewish values to bear on any liberal agenda given me. I no longer simply accept the liberal agenda as necessarily the Jewish agenda. That's why I need to know what I believe as a Jew and care about as a Jew. Because I am then able to try to distinguish as best I can, it's a hell of a job, between those general human issues, which are really compelling to me as a Jew, those issues on which I no longer can be assured. I want to tell you, when there's an issue about the security of the state of Israel as against some universal human concern, and they conflict with one another in U.S. policy, I am torn apart. And I should be torn apart. Because I won't give up being a Jew, and I won't give up that general understanding and response. But I go back to my key issue. Once it was all so clear where the values came from. You read The Nation magazine or The New Republic. What's your problem? Then you found a verse in the Torah to match it, and you had Jewish ethics. Today, we're no longer sure, as a result of which we want to find some ground out of which we can know how to live. Now, we've got to talk about securing that ground, and my gravamen here is that finding those deep Jewish roots are the prerequisites for Jewish duty, which in my opinion certainly includes a universal duty, whether it carries through with your political program or not.
Milton, would you like to?
I think that was admirably well said.
How about that, friends? You've seen it here.
Okay, on this positive note, I'm afraid we'll have to call this evening to an end. There will be an opportunity, however, for us to ask questions, ask additional questions, since we have a reception which is in the room immediately joining us behind you. And we would like to ask everyone who'd like to stay to please join us for wine and refreshments. I frankly had planned an ending for this series with my associate David Zoni. We'd gone through the whole scenario of what would happen tonight, and everything worked out differently than we expected, because Milton Himmelfarb chose the only verse that I could possibly remember from Malachi, since I remember having read the Haftorah, and also remember my friend Hillel Levine having used that verse at a Federation protest. But since it's the only thing I have to end the thing, I'll have to end it with that. As Milton said, and,
That's Milton Malachi.
who didn't change his name. Behold, I'll send you Elijah the prophet, and he will turn the heart of the fathers to their children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the land with a curse. I don't think Milton put the last part in about smiting the land with a curse. In any case, it's been a fascinating 4 sessions, and I must admit that for me this was probably the most rewarding, because we had 2 very literate, intelligent, and sometimes disagreeing, but always exciting and stimulating thinkers, both of whom have been my teachers, and hopefully yours too, to put a kind of coda on what has been, I think, an interesting and also frustrating 4-part series. What we'd like to do, David Zoni and myself, and with the help of John Ruskay, is to edit the tapes that we've made of these 4 weeks, and to take out those elements which we think are most lasting, and then to use that as a basis of discussion among some selected people, and take whatever comes out of all that, which will be perhaps 6 months to a year from now, and use that as a way of asking certain hard questions to this culture while it's still young enough to answer them. Thank you very, very much for coming. Please join us in the reception. Thank you very much.